Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Jens Heitland Show, where I interview experts from different fields to connect the dots of innovation and entrepreneurship. This is an Innovation Breakfast Club episode where I dig a little deeper into one specific topics with different guests in one episode. In this episode, we talk about what we explored in 9 Breakfast Club episodes together and what we learned and what was interesting to us. Please welcome to the show Dennis, Joshua, and Werner. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Innovation Breakfast Club. Haven't seen you guys for a while. How are you doing?
Innovation never sleeps.
Yeah.
Silence.
Like they say in Poland, bardzo dobrze.
Which means?
Everything is good.
Everything is
Good times. Good times.
Good. Yeah, looking forward to today.
Yeah. I missed you guys. I just had to throw that in there as well.
Yeah,
For those who are watching, the video session, you'll notice that Werner has taken a leaf out of Jens's book or a page out of Jens's book and has a nice background lights, making Dennis and I look a little bit unprofessional there, Dennis.
I have background lights as well, but you only
It's
see
just
when
not
it's getting
visible.
dark.
No, but that's not true. I learned from Werner that it's the other way around. He was
But then,
my teacher.
I'll also add that Joshua, like unlike myself and maybe Jens a little bit, is that he still has natural light, sunlight. I'll give all this up.
Yeah,
to
I
have
also
sunlight.
I don't have sunlight
Yeah.
anymore.
I miss the sun. Like, what is that? That little flame ball in the sky?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of gone here in Holland as well. It's just raining. But it's
Anyways.
I don't know.
Let's
But
not
Dennis,
talk
you-
about
yeah.
let's not
Yeah.
talk about weather. If Joshua is
Yeah.
starting from South Africa, I think we will all start to cry.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's quite fascinating, seeing that we sort of first convened in this format in February of this year, and now we're sitting at the end of 2021, and who knows where the last sort of 10 months have gone, but it's quite remarkable, and I know we've had some fascinating conversations here, and I've certainly enjoyed learning from all of you guys on the call, so I'm looking forward to what we've got lined up today.
Yes.
I echo that.
Let's get into it. So for everyone who is listening or watching this, what we agreed to do today is look backwards in the way that we kind of deconstruct the different episodes we have done. And we have just argued like 5 minutes of how many episodes we did. My count is 8 Innovation Breakfast Club episodes, and others are saying 10, or 9. Let's figure that out. We just start with the last one on my list, which was Walk the Talk. That's episode number 107. Everyone watching or listening to this, if you haven't listened to that, you should go back first and then start listening this. Just increasing the downloads a little bit.
Yeah.
So 100 Walk the Talk. What was that about? What did we learn? What did we chat about? Anyone remembers?
Yeah, it's about the difference between taking action and going for perfection. So the balance between trying to do something as a prototype or at the end coming to a point where you almost don't want to give up the process because you need to go to some form of perfection. And it was a little bit of the balance between those two things. If I look at my
So it's fascinating. I was sort of last night when we sort of decided to work backwards from where we'd come from. I went back to sort of this last episode that we recorded, and the first visual that I've got in my notes is around the Gartner hype cycle, which is one of the things that I brought to the table in that discussion, and sort of spoke about this slope of enlightenment, sort of towards the end of the hype cycle. So just quickly to recap, sort of the phases inside of the hype cycle are trigger tech, peak of inflated expectations, trough of disillusionment, slope of enlightenment, and plateau of productivity. And I thought it's quite fascinating. And the reason that we sort of ended up looking back from where we've come from is quite an exercise in itself, because I think a lot of people do that at the end of the year, the end of the calendar year. but they also sort of do it in the way that they approach projects. So, we all part of and have worked in innovation spaces, and we've set up retrospectives. And so what does it mean to actually look back at those different phases inside of areas where you've walked the talk, which is quite fascinating to think about.
Yeah, as a part of looking back, what is important for me always with the perspective of what can we learn from what we did to advance the ball going forward. So for me, it's not just being nostalgic, which is always nice with you guys, talking about the good old days, but it's more about how can we take good pieces or as well what we did wrong and advance the ball going forward, advance how we think, advance what we could do either together or separately in the future. So that's what I like very much about looking backwards as well.
Yeah, so if I just throw 10 cents in there, and it's like it's something that's been a reoccurring theme for me in the last 3 months specifically, because I was working on a big experience design project. And when you think about experience design, sometimes you can think about UX or service design or employee experience, all these things, and people tend to focus. And I don't know, my world, maybe it's just because where I operate, it's like a key focus. I've just seen it a lot. I've had a great conversation recently with a senior marketer, kind of CMO level, where they're talking about how marketing is becoming the new experience design. And the point that I'm trying to make, or what I want to add to the conversation, is that one of the most important things around experience design is creating time for reflection. And I think, and reflection is like, I've just experienced this, and before forcing a customer into the next thing, are you allowing him for a time to reflect? And I think even if I think about my experience with you guys last year, I think we're doing that now, is that like little moment of reflection. Even if you can't grasp, like I'm sitting here like, what the hell did we talk about? But even just slowing down and then giving Dennis a chance to kind of show his stack, kind of just brings back memories of like the things that we've spoken about, and really builds that foundation for what's to come next, right? It kind of sets the tone.
Yeah, so I'll throw a little thing to jog your memory, Werner. So you were sitting on the coast in Montenegro, and you were struggling with a little internet connection, which I hopefully won't struggle with today from South Africa, because mine's been a little bit patchy of late. But we decided to go ahead and record the episode because you were one of the OGs of the very first Breakfast Club. And, it was fascinating where the conversation took us. We were talking about everything from the importance of walking the talk, the importance of also making time to sometimes talk and do less walking, and where we can sort of get confused with around walking simply meaning progress, and the importance of exactly that, taking that step back and sort of allowing things or some time to absorb what's being spoken about, or look at something from a different perspective. And when in thinking about that little space that you were in at that time, is how much dependent we've become on technology, and how dependent we've become on technology to walk the talk. And if someone can't tune into a meeting, and I know Jens and I had this experience earlier in the year where we were with a client and they were struggling with internet connections, and all of a sudden, that changes the whole dynamic between being able to walk the talk. And this was a senior leader with inside an organization that had a dicey internet connection. And now you think about how we've all met, and I've never met any of you guys in person, but we've been able to collectively collaborate over the last 10 months, which has been super cool and awesome. But it's also about thinking potentially, what does the next 12 months look like? As we look back on this experience and thinking about walking the talk, we walked the talk in this innovation breakfast, where we sort of figured it out, created some really cool call to actions and discovery along the way. What does that look like in a world that's maybe not as connected as this?
Yeah.
I made a visual note, and I get attracted to just one thing on it that's in my mind constantly, and you guys didn't react to it that well, because it was all about bringing back that little paper clip.
Clippy
as a helper to remind you that sometimes you need to be actionable, sometimes you need to be a perfectionist, and all the tips that are carried with it in between. As an output of like the 8 episodes we did, because I recounted, and of course Jens is right, he's German, so
It's
I just have access to the raw files.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's interesting to see that our collective wisdom of our experience, at least, lies in the fact that we get to a point where we can look back and see how we can maybe chunkify those tips and tricks and put them in some form of an experience for people to access when they are in a form of innovation. And I was reminded, I prepared minimally for this session, but was reminded of our trip to Poland, and we got these special cards that were lying around in the castle. And the great thing about those things is that the cards themselves, they're really nice, but sometimes I get them and I just get random inspiration. And because there's so many people with so many tips and tricks, there's no way to just, you don't need to put everything in order. You can just access random tips because everybody has them. And that might be a very interesting thing to see how we can harvest the things that we got from all of these sessions and start to put them into some form of a blockchain thing.
Don't get Josh started.
No, we are talking. Now, for everyone who is interested to find all these episodes in a quick way, you can go to jensheitland.com, and there is the podcast. And then you can just click on the word cloud, which is Innovation Breakfast Club. And then you will see all Innovation Breakfast Club episodes, and most of them are the ones we talk about today. But let's move on to, which fits maybe to the point, Diversity of Thoughts, which is episode number 98. What was that about? It was definitely, in my recollection, it was about us exploring how important it is to have different understandings of the world, different perspectives, but as well the importance of listening and trying to understand the other party or the other person.
Yeah, so I'll jog the memories here with a little quote, and it's from Let My People Go Surfing. And it says, diversity evolves out of a commitment to constant change. And I think in terms of thinking back on how our own thinking has adapted and changed through these interactions, but also how the world has evolved over the last sort of 10 months. And what that means in terms of how we've also learned to adapt to this new way of life. We've learned to adapt businesses, we've learned to adapt our ways of trusting people, we've learned to adapt our ways of working with people that we've never met in person and with people on our teams that we've never met in the traditional way. And I think that diversity of thought has, in my mind, saved a lot of the people interaction that we've had over the last 2 years. And diversity of thought is very, very important as far as I'm concerned when you're building our teams, because you're always wanting people to challenge your ways of thinking, to bring their views to the table so that can almost be built out over time.
Reflection from the others.
How do you follow that up, right? I mean, the thing is, I was thinking, like, what point am I going to make? Especially when you talk about diversity, I can't help myself to go into more of the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. It's been a key topic for me this last year. And then I look at the screen and it's like, luckily it's not for old guys or old white guys. There's at least one young white guy. So there's a tinge of diversity in our conversation. But I would also say, tipping my hat to Jens, I think, as we went on this adventure with the Innovation Breakfast Club, you've also become like the Gary V of innovation. But the one thing I will kind of like tip my hat to is that I think we had a conversation right in the beginning. It's like, wow, Jens, like, it looks like a bunch of old white guys talking about stuff. And you said to me, Werner, hold on to your hat. Not that I have one yet, but if I see the content coming past my my screen from what you guys are doing outside the club, I can see all the thoughts from different people. And I also been lucky enough to meet the cleaner, more stylized version of the Innovation Breakfast Club, where we had the overlap. That was one of my favorite episodes, because we had the Innovation Breakfast Club ladies here. There was a few key moments there. So I think that diversity comes also through in action. And I think, Jens, I think we all try and do that, but you've really shown it through this couple of months of the people that you're showcasing. So a hat tip to you.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the reasons for me, it's not that I push the diversity perspective the whole time. It's just I'm curious about how other people think about innovation. And that's my driver. And to figure that out, you need to talk to different people.
Man, that is, I mean, I think you just dropped a little bit of an insight there, right? Because sometimes how you operate, you try and look at like diversity through the lens of like, let's be diverse for diverse sake. You've kind of like laid it out now. So listen, that's cool, right? But I'm damn curious. There's like actual value here, and I'm super curious. And I think that is what brings that whole diversity thing to life.
Yeah.
I thought the whole diversity thing at the time, the only thing I remember was that it kind of blew my mind, because I didn't think it was going to have that much of an effect on my thinking at the time. And I think that the one thing there's two things that that jump out to me is one that says that I'm able to produce diverse thoughts, but I'm able to cross my own barriers when I'm with other people. And the idea about that is that when you do a project by yourself, you can be thinking that you're creative or diverse or whatever, but there's only in the interaction with others that starts to come out, and you truly start to move beyond that your own thinking. And the one thing that sparks my interest in my notes that I made was an equalizer of different people. And that you get to a point where you start to craft melodies or harmonies of when people are working in harmony, and you start to see that when everybody's on the same tone, that doesn't work. There needs to be some form of a harmonious wave inside of a group of people who work together. And I thought that was very interesting to see. And I remember that after that session, I dove in the rabbit hole of diversity and found out a whole lot of stuff we can't cover right now. But there's some value to discovering more diversity in design.
Yeah, I remember that call afterwards, after that episode. You have been deep diving into a lot of things and have been really excited about that.
It was unexpected for me. Yeah.
That's how it should be. That's why we do this interaction as well for us. So everyone listening or watching to this, yes, we do this for you. That's the number one reason. Number two is we do this for us because we always learn from each other. Let's go to the next one. So the episode number 88 was Innovation Space.
Oh.
What was that about? Anyone wants to start?
I think you can kick us off, Jens, because you're the master innovator in the room. So how about you start this one?
Okay. So Innovation Space was starting with a conversation of, is it a digital space? Is it a physical space? Is it a real space? Is it something in between? Is it needed? Is it not needed? So that was a little bit the introduction into that. And I will not share the conclusion because I want you as the listeners or people watching this go back and listen and watch the episode number 88. So I will not share the nuggets of that, but it's really all about that. And we discussed and explored that quite deeply. And of course we went into how would it look like in the digital version? Would it look like in the physical version? Does it make a difference? And so on. So
to me, what I remember from this, looking at the very minimalistic space image that I drew, was the fact that there's a threshold, the transitional moment that you have when you go into an innovation space, and your ability to be able to create that moment when people are moving into a space of change or renewal, or and I thought it was very interesting that the space that we've been talking about is a space where everything in between a state beginning and an end state is happening. So it's a very, very happening, chaotic space where a lot of people are very scared, and it's and I thought, I don't know actually what the whole episode, what all the nuggets are, but I think there was some creating of comfort in innovation spaces that is worthwhile listening back to.
Yeah, I think I can't remember everything from it either, but I'm kind of trying to take the themes and then drawing it back to what we've been doing across the year, right? And I think, like, if I take innovation space and try and look at what we are doing together here through that lens, I think that one of the things that I probably would have added to that conversation is intention, because, like, if we think about the club, it's like there's intent. I mean, we all have stuff going on. And we're always busy. There's always a reason not to do a recording. But then Josh says, "Hey, what's happening?" Then Jens goes, "What's the theme?" And then we rock up and we do our thing. And I think the one cool thing is there's the intention and then the discipline to actually come in. But then also it's not as rigorous where we have to do 10 million kind of things. I mean, I'm not saying come into an innovation space unprepared. I've seen that kind of not work completely, where people come into things and think magic's just going to happen. But I do think that intention of creating the space, setting up some kind of theming, orchestrating a little bit, and then you let the magic happen.
Yeah. I think that's also what you mentioned. You gave a little bit of a look back on the corporate you have worked and how they have designed innovation spaces and what didn't work. You mentioned a little bit about that, and what worked, of course, not always.
Yeah.
Not always bad.
Yeah, the dancing monkey stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's still a challenge. I think, and this is where I contradict myself a little bit about what we're doing here. But I think we are lucky that we have a vested interest in the space. No matter what lens we're using, all four of us, we have different approaches to it. But one of the key challenges that I've seen with clients that I've worked with this year is that you create the space, you create the intention, you set up the facilitation. But if you don't have a vested interest of the folks coming in, where they bring something to the table from themselves, like what is, like Jens, when you said about diversity, you've got this kind of, this is the vibe that you bring to the table, that insight, that kind of keenness to it. And if you don't have that, and you just think, okay, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to watch this guy facilitate me through a empathy map, it's going to be awesome. Oh man. Those stinky spaces. You don't want to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So my biggest takeaway from that episode was really around thinking around how these spaces have changed through history and through time, and in terms of how people have created those spaces. So the importance of people in creating those spaces, but Van also linking to what you mentioned around the intentionality of it all and why these spaces are so needed. And casting my mind back to some of the points that raised in the conversation was around people saying it's one thing to say that we have an innovation team, but what does that innovation team actually enact inside of the organization? And then how does that innovation team almost percolate the ideas right the way throughout the organization, so that you've actually got buy-in and different feedback loops that are created outside of this innovation team to enable the innovation team to really create the magic. But also saying that from an organization standpoint, innovation doesn't only need to happen inside of that innovation space. It can happen in small micro instances to then feed back and move the innovation speed at a far greater rate inside of the organization.
Yeah, I like this. It's so interesting you talk about it. The thing is that I've gotten obsessed with this one word recently. Like last 2 weeks, I'm trying like assessing like what it means in my world. But orchestration has become kind of interesting for me. Like like I had this big marketing related conversation where this guy is like saying like the future is, if you think about artificial intelligence, ML, this kind of stuff, is that there's a whole stuff that where there's predictive things happening, like and relevance, and that starts to play into orchestration a little bit, which can be good and bad. But then I thought, if it comes to innovation and driving, experiences, designing them, I think sometimes we think, okay, we light the fuse and then we're going to see what happens, what explodes. But then as a lead or a facilitator, you need to try and orchestrate, or an organization needs to try and orchestrate what they're doing in the innovation space. Don't let the guys just go off and try and do something, maybe something will pop out. But I'm still trying to figure out, like, I mean, there's an element of like facilitation, like facilitating people through a process, which is kind of part of the job that I do, is like facilitate. But there's a whole different vibe when it comes to orchestration. And just to, and I'll stop now. But if I think about, Dennis spoke about music, right? So you have the guy at the front doing the orchestration, but then the music that comes from it, that's the beautiful thing. That's the unique thing. That's the gift, right? So it's not necessarily doing a Zuckerberg, but it's like, how do we have to have some form of orchestration to have the beauty happen?
Have you
I
seen
don't know if I'm making any sense.
Yeah. Have you seen the video of the conductor and this leadership video?
Different conductors.
No, yeah, there's an awesome video where they compare different conductors and the leadership abilities of them.
Yeah,
and
I think isn't it that guy who wrote the book? He actually wrote a book on it.
Yeah, might be. But in the end, it's quite cool because he's just standing there and not doing anything, and it's beautiful music. But of course,
but
that
it goes
means
like this, it goes like,
exactly. Yeah,
and there's other ones that go like this.
If we find the video, we will put it into the show notes for everyone who is interested in that.
Yeah, I actually think it's part of a business book. These guys, that guy actually wrote a book. It's awesome. I wish I could recommend it. I could be like Josh right now and drop a book. I'm
you
terrible.
just need to prepare before.
Yeah.
But let's go into the next episode that we are able to cover all of them. The next one was episode 87, which was almost a day before. It was a couple of weeks before. And that was the mixed episode where the first two Breakfast Club teams, if we call them teams. So we together have been the first team, and then there was a female version, except me being in the call. And that was the episode is called The Intersection of Brilliant Minds. And that was with, I think, Ulrike, Mercedes, Deborah, and you guys. And we need to plan one for the future, by the way, with all the different teams, because we have now two more teams doing breakfast clubs, and most probably even more.
It's interesting, Jens. It's interesting how you named that episode, because that episode was around. It's all about the people, and it's interesting how we've sort of, intersected minds and people. And is that because we now associate people out and out with their thinking because we've been in this 2D environment over the last 24 months? Or is there actually something a bit deeper to that in terms of a connection where we think about people differently based on the minds and the thinking that they bring to the table?
Yeah, that was the reason for me to call it like this, because it was a very, very interesting vibe to see. One thing is the two groups, which I know everyone, and you haven't met some of them before, to meet and talk about the topic, which is fairly broad. It's all about people can be everything and nothing. And that was quite an interesting conversation. And that for me was like, if you bring interesting people together to talk about people, it was for me the intersection of brilliant minds.
Yeah, so no, it's fascinating just looking back on my notes and sort of preparing a bit for this and thinking through that and what does it mean, because I also went back and looked at the name of the episode and I sort of thought quite a bit about why is it that we are so drawn to people's minds and what makes us attracted to the way people think and the way people communicate what they think. And I think in terms of, inside of that episode, we also had a number of different people from around the world with different language barriers and things like that, which also brought a whole different dynamic to it. And diversity is great. And it sort of brought me back to this quote that I'd seen the night before from Rich Roll, where he says, and he was talking about mastery here. So he says, because the purpose, beauty, and satisfaction you desperately seek lies not in the accomplishment, but rather in the experience of striving towards it with everything that you've got. And now if you think about what this means from a mind's perspective and bringing together diversity of minds and different minds, how is it that we can then create this almost synergistic environment where these minds can connect and almost produce this element of mastery that can then produce something incredibly magical in the way that we think and the way that we connect as people?
But there's also in that quote is also being kind of in the moment, in the process, and enjoying that. That's a big topic for me.
I because I couldn't write that down. I wrote down a different quote which meant exactly the same thing, which was a song from Motorhead, is that the chase is better than the catch. But I did write down Rich Roll. I was like, oh, what was it? Oh, what was it again? It was like, you didn't say that, but you said something else. And I love that you gave that back now. So
all hail Lemmy. All hail Lemmy.
Oh yes. But there were some really nice things that came out of that had to do with, and we went down a rabbit hole of belonging and sense of belonging, and claiming responsibility, all very unique things. But what jumped out to me was something that Mercedes said at the end, was that she was doing something she was becoming, at the time it wasn't allowed to say, I think, but she was becoming somebody for Vodafone, and she was very much into technology. And she held a very interesting final word, where one of her quotes was the fact that you have to trust technology because it's made by humans. And I really, that was a hopeful thing for me, as opposed to other talk about the fact that technology is like directly opposite now of with all the dangers of AI. But maybe AI is like, it can help to find a refined humanity in that sense. And there's some very interesting literature toying around about the ethics of AI and all those kinds of things. And it's I love that. That jumped out to me. So trusting technology because it's made by humans. And it's when you talk about people and you create the things that mimic us and that want to automate us to make us free to do more us, because we love us. But now the us is turning into something that is for a lot of people something that might be dangerous and uncontrollable, but it's still a part. It's something you can trust if you give it the right intentions. And I like that. That was a good for me. That stood out.
Let's look into the next one. Or did we miss anything? No? Good. The Myth of Experimentation, episode number 70.
Oh, are we missing the compass?
Are we missing the compass?
We're missing the compass.
Oh, see? Which episode number was it?
I don't know. It's in the Breakfast Club number 5.
Compass. Let me just search
it was
here.
the innovation compass.
The compass was on it was the episode before, which was on the 1st of June.
I will have it in a second. The Innovation Compass, episode number 79.
79.
That's the good thing when you have a search engine on the website, on the podcast website. For anyone, if you're interested, go to jensheitland.com and there's the podcast and you can search.
Boom, just dropped a stinger. It turns that moment into a nice little segue there. Good one, Jens.
The Innovation Compass, yes, yeah. I remember. Yeah. What was that about? By the way, then we're at 9, and this is the 10th.
Oh, so Dennis was right.
Yes. That costs a
Dennis,
lot of beers next week in the US, Dennis.
And Dennis,
Yeah.
and Dennis, we
So
trust.
Dennis, we trust. And so, Dennis, I'm going to hand the mic back to you, because we've had a conversation about one of the topics in the last 2 weeks that we chatted about in this episode, and it's got to do with maps and territories.
Oh yeah. So I would say the whole conversation about the compass is because the compass gives the impression that you know where it is that you're going, but you need to still know how to learn how to work with the compass. And when you're actually using that in combination with a map, you get to a point where I think Joshua is going with this, is the fact that the map is not the territory. And that is, I would say, a very interesting part of the discussion that I remember, because it is the stuff that people do want. They want to get the map, and they want to have the tools, and they want to have everything that then they're going to start. Then they can innovate. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because you can buy all the books, doesn't mean you can innovate. And in that sense, it's and I think our intention was to build, like it was, I'm seeing the words, practical thought framework that allows people to engage and navigate the complexity of innovation. I would say that's something that a whole lot of people are trying to create, because it's quite difficult to interact with everything that has to do with innovation. And I would say the people who are best at it, they don't have maps; they're just really good guides. And I think that's what I can take away from that episode.
And that's a good one, talking about guides, Dennis, because when we play with this metaphor of maps and compasses, and I think we touched on it as well, as like, like you feel like it's like when you go on holiday with your parents in South Africa, you travel from Johannesburg to Cape Town, and you just focused on Cape Town, right? And you miss the beautiful Karoo, which is like a desert landscape. It's beautiful. It's actually like, it's beautiful. And what I'm trying to say with my little illustration there is that it's also about the journey, right? It's not just about the destination. It's like a bit of an old statement to make, but I think in innovation, it's super important, because therefore we have our innovation fuck up nights, because sometimes you make the wrong turn, right? And your wife starts screaming at you. You don't want to look at the map, because you're in control. I'm driving. But what are you learning out of that wrong turn before you hit that? And is there actually a final destination, Dennis? I think that's the other thing we said.
No,
like,
but that was the whole point.
A final destination.
There's no real end point.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing. And you need a point of reference to start from, which is the thing that is also something that if you can learn a whole lot of things about acting in a certain way to be innovative, but if you don't have the correct starting point, it's almost doomed to fail.
Yeah, that was definitely very, very good conversation. I remember that. Next one.
Well, 2 seconds, because
we're a little bit under time pressure.
Yeah, but I see these words, and that's probably a knowledge bomb by Joshua called the Gaia hypothesis, and I don't know what that is anymore.
Hello.
Could you really, really quickly recap that? Big of a bomb.
So I think we'll have to throw it into the show notes. But it's essentially around the way that we navigate and what that links to. And I think it also touches on in terms of what that means from points of reference. So in terms of, I think, Dennis, you and Van have already touched on it at a very high level in terms of what does it mean to have points of reference on a map. And we've touched on the difference between a map and a territory. So it's linked to that thinking, but I will be sure to send over a link so that we can include the full definition of the Gaia hypothesis in the show notes.
Great.
The other opportunity is, if you're interested in that, go back to episode number 79. And you listen to it, and Josh will explain it to you.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
That's
from his mouth. You don't have to read a thing. It's out of his mouth, whop into your ear.
And he can see it as well on YouTube.
Yeah.
So next one was episode 70, right, Dennis? Yours
the myth of experimentation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that
what is perfection?
That was exactly. We discussed a lot around Is
We
it
should deliver like perfection, guys. Perfection. But like, whose definition of perfection? You know,
uh,
what is it? What does perfection look like?
especially me coming from a large corporate where you only launch and publish things that are 100% perfect, if not even 110%.
Yeah.
And most of the time they take 5+ years. And if you build airports in Germany, even longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this was a lot about risk taking, wasn't it, Joshua?
Yeah. So Dennis, just to jog your memory, this is where I sort of got you on a bit of a tangent about razors
Yeah.
and Helen's razor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for those who are watching, you will see that Dennis's eyes have just got a lot bigger. If you're watching on YouTube,
Razor
because
eyes.
his mind sort of just got taken back to sort of where his mind went the weekend after we recorded, because we recorded this episode in midweek, and then all of a sudden in our WhatsApp group, we got a whole series of razor images
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
had been brought into life through Dennis's great visual talents.
And I see that I've drawn a lady with a cow.
He's
Yeah,
now in
so
his
maybe
cow
just-
phase.
Yes. So there are two things that I'll just sort of jog everyone's memory with, and some of the thinking that I've been doing around this was, the first is around neuroplasticity. And that's from David Eagleman's book, Live Wired. And neuroplasticity, for those who don't know what it is, it's talking about how our brains, so the plasticity of our brains actually grows through experience. And there's sort of an evolution that takes place. And I think in terms of thinking back to this episode and thinking around experimentation, how can we lean into and grow from experimentation? Or is that purely a myth, that we don't grow from experimentation and that we're actually born with all the answers and that we just have to discover them as we navigate through life? But essentially, just to recap the razor comment that I was joking about previously with Dennis, so it's called Helen's razor. And Helen's razor states that we should not attribute to malice that which is more easily explained by stupidity. So it's not directly linked to the concept of the myth of experimentation, but it's more around how do we explicitly define or attribute things which we take, actions which we take, and how do we almost appropriate that blame. So Dennis, maybe you want to talk a bit about, now that you've heard that quote again, what that maybe sparked in your thinking.
Yeah, because the word razor and risk together, of course, makes a very nice, rich world to visualize. But it ends up showing a very clear line between two different, I would say, states of a culture. So when you are looking at I would say the old baby boom focus on flawless structure, as opposed to the, I would say, newer, innovative way of thinking and looking at flawed opportunity. Those are things that come together at a point where there. I think I drew a person literally dancing on the razor's edge,
Yes.
and in that sense, and it is trying to balance success. As opposed to 0% risk or 90% risk. But that person who's walking on the razor's edge will also always have some form of risk. But I would say the ideas between of Helen's razor, because I was looking for the name Helen, but it wasn't. It was Henlon, right?
We'll have to include a link in the show notes, and maybe a link to your Instagram page so people can see some of the visuals that you put out around that. Yeah,
and it's a wonderful thing to check out. Again, reminded by Jens, check out that episode, and especially that, because it'll stretch your thinking, start to appreciate the difficulties around taking risk as a part of experimentation. And that's where the whole myth thing.
We need to move on. We have 3 episodes and 10 minutes. Sorry to put a little bit pressure on us.
Let's go.
So for everyone interested in that episode, that was episode number 70. We go to episode number 58, Superpowers of Innovation. I still have the drawings from Dennis in my mind. So it was we looked into what are the kind of differentiators with working with innovation. So a lot about the human part of innovation and how you do that, how you facilitate it, and so on.
Yeah, and I specifically remember this episode because Dennis brought up the concept of the anti-hero
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
importance of that. And in thinking about it, and Dennis, there are two reasons. So the one is the anti-hero that I remember you bringing up quite importantly, and also challenging all of us on the call to think through what's the importance of having an anti-hero inside of the rooms or the teams that you're working with. And the second was just around the way that you challenged our thinking around what is a superpower, and you asked us to go deeper on what is a superpower, because a lot of the things and almost the characteristics that we were defining, we were saying that these are almost characteristics of people in terms of how people are operating and things like that. And I think that that's quite fascinating. Just to cast my mind back, then we need to go almost deeper when we start thinking about certain things and say, hey, is this a superpower, or is this maybe a construct that we've sort of developed over time?
I've written down a quote that I think came out of all of us in that sense as a summary. That's individual. That's saying a true innovator is a master of balance, guiding people on the path of hyper-focused action and interconnected wonder. And I thought that everybody wants to be an innovator in that sense, right? But that's it. So it's all about mastering balance, and in that sense, in the person who is the innovator, there is the superhero, but there is also the villain. There needs to be, otherwise there cannot be balance. So that was So I liked it. It was a good. We were on a roll.
Yeah, and someday, if you listen to this in 2035, you will find all of this interesting things in NFTs somewhere. But let's go to the next one. Second episode we did as an Innovation Breakfast Club, episode number 46, leading culture transitions in growing organizations. There was still very much corporate focus on how do you help organizations to transform with innovation, and how hard it is to do that in specifically large organizations.
Yeah, so I'll kick off the thinking again, and it's again spurred on by a comment that Dennis made inside of that episode, where he brought up the concept of a starting culture and how culture evolves through time. And you challenged our thinking again, Dennis, and you said, what does it mean to have a culture that evolves through time? And how does an organization establish that starting culture? And some of the things that we chatted about was almost taking that startup environment culture and sort of keeping that in mind as the business grows. How do you go about doing that? What are some of the mechanisms that you can do to achieve that? And also, what does it mean in terms of allowing people to establish their own ways of working inside an organization?
Yep.
Shall
we go to the last one, or more topics on this one?
Before we jump off onto that one, Jens, I also just want to jog Werner's memory here, Werner, because you were also just talking about from a cultural perspective, how and why, and we tied it back to this concept, which we'll chat about now in the first episode on entrepreneurial culture and entrepreneurial mindset, and how do you bring that into an organization? And you specifically referred back to some of your experiences working in the design space and working with teams, and almost using that cultural element to almost energize them, and through energizing them, getting people to produce some of their best work. So, that importance of people, again, which is something that has come up as a recurring theme that we've chatted about between the four of us, but also in different conversations.
Because what is the driver? I think people make the mistake that either fear or money or whatever is the incentive. And I've long held the belief, and I've kind of joked around about it with my advertising agency example, is that culture can make people believe in something. And if you do it with integrity, you can really drive change. So yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. That's actually one of my key things that
That's
I
one
love
of-
to talk about.
That's one of your innovation superpowers. So maybe you can also tap that onto Dennis's drawing. Now that I'm sure that this is going to spark Dennis to clean up some of those drawings, and I'm sure that's
He's going to have to review his stack.
Fine. The stack is here. Just have to see how things are connected. And I would say, just before we get to the final episode, that would be something that's very interesting to see how to do. And I can see that the notes that I've taken in the beginning were very figurative, making it easier to relate to. And I think the things were getting more complicated as we went along, making it less relatable, and a challenge for me to see how I can flatten it towards something experiential or something that looks like my mother would understand.
If I may venture another insight, I think it's kind of like it's an innovation thing, if you think about it, Dennis, because when you start off something like this, at the beginning, it's easy because everything we say is fresh and new. And as you go through episode, they overlap slightly. So you don't want to be talking about the same thing. You want to build on top of those topics. It's kind of like the same as design thinking. Like you can't come back with the same things. You have to build on top of it, connect it, expand it. And I think that's why the conversations go deeper as you go forward through the series.
Yeah, agree. And then as well, if we take the team part, I mean, we have never been in these conversations before as the four of us. We know each other individually somehow, but not as this group. And we have evolved as a team as well. Let's go into the first ever recorded Innovation Breakfast Club series episode, which was at that time just a prototype, like a lot of things in my end. Was episode number 33. And the topic was around entrepreneurship culture or entrepreneurial culture. And I'm not sure, Josh, if we developed the entrepreneurship grid around that same time, and if we talked about it, because I haven't listened to episode 33 for ages now.
Yeah. So the entrepreneurial grid or entrepreneurship framework was built out, I think, about 2 months after that initial recording.
Oh,
so I sort of I distinctly remember this recording. It was back in sort of right at the beginning of 2021, and it was Jens introduced it to me. He said, "Hey, do you want to join a call with Dennis, who you've met, but you'll meet another fellow South African that I've got to know." And I sort of sure, let's do it. In the spirit of entrepreneurship and then spirit of innovation. And little did I know that now this 10-month sort of partnership in the innovation space would have developed out. But outside of sort of the opportunity to meet Werner, why this discussion was almost great for me to partake in, and what I learned from it was really around how you can bring the intersection of minds together inside of a podcast format. And I think that, between the four of us, we've listened to our fair share of podcasts. We've also tried a lot of things. We've innovated with different ways of doing things. And I think to bring groups and people together in this way around a shared topic and just see where the conversation takes us, I think we actually produce something that we can all sort of be quite proud of, but also that we've all learned from that very first conversation back in the early months of 2021.
Yeah.
100%.
That is the thing with innovation. And I wanted to say it in one of the previous episodes that we covered, is that, and it was kind of related to the risk thing. And I thought, let me not waste time here. But I think it's a closing thing, is that it doesn't matter what you do. There's never really a risk if you know that you're going to learn something.
That's a beautiful ending.
So I want to challenge our thinking a bit here, Jens. So I want to go back, wind our minds back to that episode. And we spoke about an entrepreneurial culture, and we spoke about an entrepreneurial mindset. And we spoke about that in the context of ourselves, but we also spoke about that context in terms of what that means for organizations to have an entrepreneurial mindset. And if we maybe just think about that, is, do we think that potentially organizations that have had more of an entrepreneurial mindset maybe have survived the last 24 months better than those who haven't? And that's something for us to, maybe we don't need to reflect on and answer that now, but it's maybe a future discussion that we can have in terms of what are some of the lessons that we've all experienced from the clients that we've worked with, but also from businesses that we've observed over the last 24 months as we've dealt with COVID.
And also That's great. Like, I think that's something we can look out for, because for me personally also, it's like, I think our shared experience has kind of forced a lot of entrepreneurship and innovation, but who's going to sustain it? Because what I'm seeing at the moment, I mean, except now for what happened, thanks to my poor country taking a bashing for what's happening next now in this pandemic, but um, I think there was a level of little bit of comfort coming in again. Hey, let's get things back to where it was. I've seen it with my clients. Let's get back to how it was, and then boom, then you have to jump back in. And I wonder how many companies are going to retain that entrepreneurship kind of vibe. Those who've picked it up, or who's going to kind of like slack back to the comfort zone.
To be provocative, those who will be still around in 10 years.
That is true. That is true.
But I think I agree. It's if you didn't go back to your entrepreneurship roots as an organization, you will struggle the next couple of years.
You've been hurting.
You have been hurting the last 2 years, but it's not over yet.
No.
I mean, now, like you said, everyone thought it's over, and now we talk about right now. It's, what is it, 7th of December in Germany? They're talking about lockdowns, and I don't know what's going to happen before Christmas even. And retail, if we just take one of the big sectors that's heavily impacted, restaurants. We don't know how many companies are surviving a fourth lockdown.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm laughing, I'm smiling, and I don't want to make light of a very serious. I mean, this has been a terrible year, and 2 years in a way for everybody. But for me specifically, this last year was like really sucked. But it reminds me a little bit of like this classic Deloitte slide. Ex-Deloitte, so hopefully they're not going to sue me for mentioning directly, but all the other firms know what I'm talking about. It's like you walk in with your suit, slap up, say, okay, cool, digital transformation, artificial intelligence. I'm sure, what's the name? Joshua's snuck in blockchain and NFTs, but this time he's extended it slide even longer. And I would never forget when this whole pandemic started, and we just started this innovation breakfast thing where the slide was making the rounds on LinkedIn. So how did who caused your digital transformation? Artificial intelligence, blockchain, or COVID-19?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that is a reality of a lot of change here.
Yeah. I just want to thank you guys, because I had a blast being challenged in my head to think about the stuff that I experienced in innovation, and to be challenged by others in their experiences, which were sometimes totally different. Me being not so much interested in people, more in the content, and Jens, for instance, saying it's all about the people. I think I've been swayed towards that point. I understand that. But there's some transformational things that have happened inside of these episodes, very worthwhile listening to. So from my point of view, thanks a lot for setting this up.
Yeah.
And looking forward to how we piggyback towards the next episodes.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Jens, for creating this platform. Thanks, Josh. Great to meet you in this last couple of months. Can't wait to meet you in person one day in our country. I mean, you're looking after my kingdom for me while I'm away. And then Dennis, like when I was thinking about the learning that there's one thing that because my memory is all bombed, right? But there's one thing that I kind of can't forget about this Innovation Breakfast Club is something that you continue doing. So if Jens would go, this is the topic, what if it's blue? Then Dennis will come in and says, what if it's not blue? Right? And I've started implementing, because that's like that whole reframe thing, like reshifting. I've started using it the last couple of months a lot more, where if someone makes a statement, I try and do the not to be an asshole, but to say, okay, let's look at it from a different, reframing it. But what if it is like this, guys? And then, everybody's like, oh, shit, we've got a troublemaker. And then things start just working better. So I want to thank you, Dennis, for that little orchestration tip there.
Nice.
Troublemaker.
Nice to see that you are becoming a troublemaker yourself.
Yeah, cool, guys. So I will sort of end off before handing it back to Jens, but I just want to echo those words of thanks. So it's been a remarkable sort of 10 months, and the conversations have carried on long outside of these episodes, and we've done some really cool things together. And Van, I've been fortunate enough to go onto your live show and things like that, and look forward to seeing how that builds out. And one of the things that it's reminded me of is around how sometimes collaborations can come from spaces that you least expect them to. And I didn't come into this podcasting space or connecting with Jens with any expectations. And that's something that I'm sort of re-immersing myself in now in terms of this new world that I'm exploring inside of blockchain and things like that. Is I'm not going into it with any expectations. I'm really just going in to learn. And I think in terms of, if we think about that, I've learned a huge amount from all three of you guys over the last 10 months. And I'm sure that I'm going to learn a lot more in the coming years and things like that. But one quote that I just want to use to summarize all of that before sort of handing it back to Jens is around sort of saying is, what does it mean when we think through things in a slightly different way than what got us to this point? And I think that after the last 12 months, we've really had that opportunity to think through that, but we've also got so much more in front of us. And so the quote is around, we are all faced with a series of great opportunities, brilliantly disguised as impossible situations.
Man, that's power.
Yeah, nice.
And
So,
I need to close
thanks.
it now. No, I need to bring the human aspect in, Dennis.
Good.
No,
Good.
so for me, it's not just, I hope at least professional, constructive discussion we have managed over the last 10 months. It's also a friendship that has developed in different ways because we didn't know each other that deep. And of course, the people who are listening to this or watching this on YouTube or wherever, you just see the final product. You don't see the connections we build and the WhatsApp fun stuff we are sending to each other in between. And I think that's what I'm deeply appreciating, that our friendship developed. And I was talking to someone yesterday. She was mentioning the new world of business is where you build the friendship first and then do business with each other. And
Yeah.
that's for me an interesting way of looking at it. Not that I will charge you guys next time, but it's more about, I think there are huge opportunities for bringing this to the next level in the coming years, whatever and wherever it will bring us. But going back to what I started with, it starts with the friendship, and with the
Yeah.
topic Joshua was mentioned is like selfless. We put ourselves in and just connect and have a nice conversation and learn from each other, and using that knowledge in wherever we are. So big thank you for that. Really looking forward to the next year. I mean, it will be published in January, most probably. So it's already next year if you listen to this. Thank you, guys. Looking forward to the next Breakfast Club episode, and thank you for being on the journey. Thanks for listening to today's episode. You will find the links and resources in the show notes of this episode. If you would like to support the podcast, the most impactful thing you can do is subscribing to the show on any of the podcasting platforms and give me a review. This will help me to reach more innovators around the world and bring some of you into the show. If you have any questions to the guest or want to engage with me, feel free to reach out to me on social media and contact me there. Thanks, and see you in the next episode.